All right, hey, welcome to Philosophical Encounters. This is maybe just the first instructional type of one. People always asking me, Julius or Dr. Bailey, like, what is philosophy? You know what I'm saying? And so I think that that is where I want to begin. I'm set my timer here, so I won't talk too much, right? But they asked me, what is philosophy, right? And And I get the question, right? For a lot of people, philosophy sounds abstract, distant, dead folk, some old Greek, German etymology, that kind of stuff. Folks sitting around asking questions that don't seem to have no real world application, study of bullshit, you know what I'm saying? But philosophy at its best is not an escape from life, right? It's an entrance into life more deeply, right? The etymology of philosophy comes from two Greek words. Philia, philo means love, and Sophia means wisdom. So literally, it's the love of wisdom. We've heard that, right? Not the possession of wisdom, not the ownership of truth, not the arrogance of already knowing, but the love of the process of becoming what? Wise, right? To understand, right? Because to love wisdom means you don't have it yet. You're in pursuit, right? You're on the road, right? I'm leaving. I'm living my life as a questioner, a seeker, a student, a listener, right? Struggling with the world, right? Somebody who knows enough to know that life is too deep, it's too mysterious, is oftentimes too painful and too beautiful, even just just to sort of be reduced to slogans, right? So when I say I'm a philosopher, I'm not saying that I'm smarter than anyone else. I'm smarter than a lot of folk, right? Not everybody. But I'm just saying I give my life to questions, right? Questions about truth, questions about justice, questions about God, questions about death. I raise questions about love, race, democracy, suffering, all that kind of stuff, right? Ethical responsibility and the sort of strange idea called the human life or the human condition, right? And that's where I want to begin. Philosophy is often looked at as a subject, right? And in one sense, I guess it is, right? You can major in philosophy, right? At Wittenberg, come see us. Or you could take philosophy courses. You can read Plato. You can read Aristotle, Hume, Descartes, Kant, all that, Kierkegaard, all that kind of stuff. You can read them, folk, right? Um, but I think I think when we think about these people, um, you can also do them from various different ways, right? But I've always thought of philosophy more of less of a subject and more of a discipline, right? A way of thinking about subjects, right? A way of approaching the world, the way of asking, what is really being claimed here? What assumptions undergird the argument? What do we mean by justice? What do we mean by freedom? What do we mean by God or the soul or truth or what do we actually mean about this stuff, right? So what follows, if you believe that, what follows from that? Who benefits from that idea? Who is harmed from those ideas, right? What kind of person does the belief in X or Y cause me to become, right? The character, right? Of who we are. That's why you would think about a PhD, right? A PhD is a doctor of philosophy in various subjects, right? A doctor of philosophy in chemistry, a doctor of philosophy in sociology, a doctor of philosophy in political science, a doctor of philosophy in education or religion or economics or language, right? You can have English, right? You can have all that, right? Um, um, but I think the thing to think about is still called a doctor of what? Philosophy. Why? Because philosophy, properly understood, is not just one little department in the university that may have a couple majors, but it's a deep inquiry into life itself, into into the field of knowledge, is learning not simply what you know, but how you know it, right? Why it even matters that we engage in it, what assumptions guide, what methods justifies, what values shape the very subject that we're studying, right? And what human consequences follow from those subjects, right? That's why I tell people all the time, philosophy is not just what you study, right? It's how you learn to think about what you study, right? That's how your professors have, doctorate degrees. When I was a graduate student, Cornell West gave me a way of understanding this that has stayed with me all these years. Folk would always ask, "What field are you in?" And Dr. West would always push back on that intellectual containment, right? And he would say, don't let folk lock you into fields, right? He would say something like this: cows have fields, right? I don't have a field, right? Cows have fields. In other words, don't let the academy or anybody else reduce a philosopher to a fenced in patch of academic grass, right? I'm a philosophy. I'm a philosopher. The world is my intellectual playground. The world is my topography, right? That doesn't mean anything goes. It doesn't mean that we should be shallow. It doesn't mean that we should avoid rigor, right, or evidence, or history, or careful argument. It's just the opposite. That's what we do. It means that the philosopher, though, refuses to let life get chunked up into little pieces that doesn't speak to each other, little academic silos, right? Because true knowledge doesn't come to us in neat categories, right? When a mother buries a child, that's not just psychology, but it's also religion. It's also ethics. It's also metaphysics, right? Uh, 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 um, whether or not politics was involved, whether or not literature or English is involved, if she has to write an obituary, or it's religion, if she asks God why, right? It's philosophy because she asks, well, what's the meaning of life now, right? That's philosophy. When a nation like now is arguing about what is democracy, it's not just political science that does that. It's law, it's anthropology, it's race, it's economics, it's psychology. It's all that together, which is why what philosophers engage all that, right? And when a young person asks a developmental psychology question, who am I, right? That's philosophy at work, right? That's identity construction, that's freedom, that's responsibility, that's desire, right? That's anxiety at work, right? Community, and I think a sense of embodiment, right? And the question of what type of life is even worth living, right? So philosophy matters, I argue, because it helps us to connect things, right? It asks us not simply to gather information, but to seek wisdom, right? And Lord knows we have a lot of information, right, that we could use in AI. You can Google anything, right? You can ask AI to summarize anything, right? You can get facts, you can get some definitions, some clips, opinions. You can get reactions to opinion, outrage. You can get all this kind of stuff on Google, right? But information is not wisdom. Watch that, clip that, link that to your social media. Speed is not depth, right? Access is not understanding. Having an opinion does not mean you have careful thought. Philosophy slows us up a little bit. It teaches us to ask better questions. It teaches us to resist easy answers, right? It teaches us to look beneath the surface, right? It teaches us that the first thing that comes to mind often is not the deepest or the most thorough aspect of what the truth might be, right? We have to get through the contradictions, not avoid them, right? So in essence, like philosophy have various branches, right? One is metaphysics, right? So metaphysics, that branch asks questions about what is real, what exists. Is there a God? Do we have souls? What is time, right? What does it mean to be, right? Uh, um, Metaphysics asks, is the world material only, or is it material and immaterial, right? That's metaphysics. Another branch of philosophy is epistemology, right? Epistemology asks questions about knowledge, right? What does it mean to know something? How do we know what we claim to already know? What does truth mean? What is belief? What is that distinction? What is evidence, right? Can we trust reason in this process? Can we trust experience, right? A priori, a posteriori. Can we trust memory? Can we trust institutions? Can we trust our mama? Right? And then there's ethics, right? Ethics is another branch of philosophy. It asks, how should we live? What is right? What is wrong behavior? What is good character? What do we owe one another? What kind of person should I become? Right? I like to say ethics is a study of morality, right? And is morality based on rules, consequences, God, care, or something like or something else, right? Then you have a lot of people hate, but I love, which is logic as a branch of philosophy, right? What makes an argument valid? What makes a conclusion follow from certain premises? When are we being intellectually consistent? When are we contradicting ourselves, right? When are we being persuaded by emotion or fear, right? Those fallacies, right? Informal fallacies, right? Then you have branches like what aesthetics, right? Ask questions about beauty and taste, literature and form, right? Creativity. Why does a song move us, right? Why does a painting disturb us sometime, right? Why does a novel reveal something about life that math can't, right? What is beauty? What is art, right? Why do human beings need expression, right? Uh, 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 Amy Willman, I got to get with you. If you see this video, or if somebody else sees this video that knows Amy Willman, we got to get back together and do a faith and our art and faith series again, right? You got political philosophy as another branch of philosophy that asks questions about justice, what makes a society just, what does government owe its people, um, when should I obey the law, or when should I resist the law, right? What is freedom, right? If there's folk who are structurally denied the conditions to live free, right? Then you have philosophy of religion. Philosophy of religion asks questions about faith, the problem of evil, belief, doubt, reason, and the sacred, secular kind of stuff. There's philosophy of mind. These are little sub branches, if you will. As philosophy of mind, I ask questions around identity and consciousness, memory, the reduction of the mind to the brain, mind body dualism, that kind of stuff. You got philosophy of science, right? These are sort of sub branches over epistemology, under epistemology or metaphysics, right? Philosophy of science, right? What constitutes evidence? We can go on and on, right? Philosophy of law, philosophy of education. You might have taken that class, right? Philosophy of race, right? Feminist philosophy, Africana philosophy, right? Environmental philosophy, and now increasingly um, a philosophy in AI, right? But here's the important point I want to leave you with. These branches are not separate little boxes, right? They overlap each other. Why? Because life overlaps with each other, right? If I ask a question that can AI replace human thinking, that's an epistemological question, right? It's also ethical question because it asks what ought we do, right? It is philosophy of mind because it asks what thinking actually is, right? It's political philosophy as well. Who has the power over technology? Is it a public domain, Elon Musk, or is it a private entity? The other brother got the dude's name. Um, you know, so that's all what philosophy is, right? And that's why I love to do what I do, right? But it's starting to make me feel sometimes that students aren't interested in the rigor. They aren't interested in the process because philosophy helps us think about the whole. It helps us to become intellectually trapped, right? Philosophy is practical, right? It's not just out here in the amorphous atmosphere because no, philosophy is practical, and they don't think it's product because it doesn't produce anything, right? I talk to parents about, well, when a major in philosophy, like, what is that going to do? Are you going to perform a surgery? Are you going to balance a budget? Are you going to fix a car? Right? I can't do none of that, right? But it's practical because human beings, we all live by ideas, right? Every policy has a philosophy behind it. Every parent has a philosophy behind it. Every institution, every school has a philosophy behind that education. Every parent has a philosophy behind their discipline, right? Every church has a philosophy of how they look at God, how they look at community, how they look at salvation, right? Every political movement has a philosophy of what? Power, freedom, right? We all have a philosophy of life. That's why I begin often my classes. What is your philosophy? The question is whether or not you've examined it. So, in summary, I think I want to say philosophy helps us to understand, do we have a philosophy? Can we tap into the way in which we look at the world? And we can't have a bad philosophical process, right? We can't have, we don't want to treat people as less than human. You don't want to have a bad philosophy of money, right? You don't want to confuse wealth with worth, if you will. You don't want to have a bad philosophy of religion, right? Because you may confuse prejudice with God's will, right? I ain't gonna say much of that, but you have to be careful, right? You don't want a bad philosophy. You don't want a bad philosophy of education because you might train students to repeat answers, but never teach them how to think. Right? So philosophy is practical because what? Thinking is practical, right? Judgment is practical. Wisdom is practical. Discernment is practical, right? Being humble is practical. And in a world where people are constantly trying to manipulate our fears, angers, our desires, our loyalties, philosophy becomes not a luxury, but a form of survival. Everybody should be a philosopher. All right. God bless you.